The 19th century saw Europe's grip on Africa tighten dramatically. This period, known as the Scramble for Africa, witnessed a rapid and ruthless race for colonial possessions. European powers, driven by economic ambitions, carved up the continent with little regard for existing societies. Prior to the 19th century, European presence in Africa was largely limited to coastal trading posts. The Industrial Revolution created a voracious appetite for raw materials, making Africa a prime target. Rubber, diamonds, gold, and other commodities were plundered to fuel European industries. Explorers like David Livingstone and Henry Morton Stanley fueled European interest. They returned with tales of vast resources and populations in need of European guidance. Colonies became symbols of national strength and strategic leverage. Competition for territory intensified, contributing to the outbreak of World War I. The scramble for Africa reached its peak with the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. This gathering of European powers without African representatives formalized the partition of the continent. It aimed to regulate colonization and trade, but served to carve up Africa among imperial powers. The principle of effective occupation meant any European power demonstrating control could claim territory. This sparked land grabs and treaty-making, often through coercion. Arbitrary borders drawn with little regard for existing boundaries had devastating consequences. These divisions sowed the seeds of future conflicts and instability. The legacy of these borders continues to plague African nations today. Following the Berlin Conference, European powers moved swiftly to consolidate their control over their newly acquired African possessions. This ushered in an era of brutal exploitation and oppression. African land was seized, resources were plundered, and indigenous populations were subjected to forced labor, taxation, and cultural assimilation. European powers established colonial administrations, often characterized by racism, paternalism, and a lack of understanding of local customs and traditions. Africans were treated as second-class citizens in their own land, denied basic rights and opportunities. Despite the brutality of colonial rule, Africans resisted European domination in various ways. Some resisted militarily, engaging in armed struggles against superior European firepower. Others resisted through passive resistance, sabotage, and by clinging to their cultural traditions. Religious leaders, traditional chiefs, and educated elites emerged as leaders of resistance movements. European imperialism in Africa was driven by a complex interplay of factors. While economic motives were significant, they were intertwined with political ambitions, social Darwinism, and a sense of cultural superiority. The Industrial Revolution created an insatiable demand for raw materials, and Africa, with its abundance of resources, became a prime target. Rubber, diamonds, gold, timber, and other valuable commodities were plundered to fuel European industries. European powers also sought to expand their empires for political prestige and military advantage. The possession of colonies became a symbol of national strength and a source of strategic leverage in the global arena. Social Darwinism, a pseudo-scientific theory popular in the 19th century, provided a convenient justification for European imperialism. This theory argued that Europeans were racially superior to Africans and had a duty to civilize them. This sense of cultural superiority permeated European colonial policies and practices. European control over Africa had a profound and lasting impact on the continent, reshaping its borders, economies, and cultures. The arbitrary borders drawn by European powers, the exploitation of resources, and the imposition of European values and institutions left an indelible mark on African societies. These artificial divisions sowed the seeds of future conflicts and instability. European powers restructured African economies to serve their own interests. They introduced cash crops such as coffee, cotton, and cocoa to generate revenue for colonial administrations and European industries. This shift to cash crop production often came at the expense of food security, leading to famines and dependence on imported goods. European colonialism also had a profound impact on African cultures. Traditional social structures were disrupted, and indigenous languages and customs were suppressed. European languages, religions, and educational systems were imposed often with the aim of assimilating Africans into European culture. European imperialism in Africa was characterized by widespread brutality and oppression. Colonial regimes resorted to violence, coercion, and terror to maintain control and extract resources. Forced labor, often under inhumane conditions, was a hallmark of European colonialism. Africans were forced to work on plantations, in mines, and on infrastructure projects, often enduring brutal treatment and appalling living conditions. The quest for rubber in the Congo Free State, for example, led to the deaths of millions of Congolese due to overwork, disease, and starvation. European colonial regimes often resorted to violence to suppress dissent and maintain control. African resistance movements were met with brutal force, and entire villages were razed to the ground as punishment for acts of defiance. Public executions, torture, and mutilation were commonplace, instilling fear and obedience among the population. The psychological impact of colonialism, with its inherent racism and denigration of African cultures, should not be underestimated. The legacy of European colonialism continues to cast a long shadow over Africa today. The political, economic, and social structures established during the colonial era have had a lasting impact, shaping the continent's post-independence trajectory. The arbitrary borders drawn by European powers continue to be a source of conflict and instability in many parts of Africa. Ethnic tensions, often exacerbated by competition for scarce resources, have fueled civil wars and hindered national unity. The economic structures established during the colonial era, characterized by the extraction of raw materials and dependence on European markets, have made it difficult for many African countries to achieve sustainable development. The legacy of colonialism is evident in the challenges of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment that many African nations continue to face. Despite the enduring challenges, it is important to acknowledge the resilience and agency of African people. Since independence, African nations have made significant strides in education, healthcare, and economic development.